Well, first of all, thank you to ERPIC for inviting me. It's nice to be back with my ERPIC friends. I was asked about the current status of US-Turkish relations. I think one has to say that, of course, while Turkey remains an ally of the United States through NATO, and continues to participate in a lot of alliance activities, it is no longer a reliable strategic partner. And as a result, I think we've seen in recent years what I would call bet hedging by the United States on the possibility that the day may come when Turkey is no longer even an ally. Now, nobody wants that day to come. And nobody in the United States wants that day to come. Now, nobody in the US security establishment wants that day to come. But it would probably be strategic malpractice not to prepare for the possibility, given trends in Turkish policy in recent years. So, for example, we've seen a dramatic increase in the US-Greek military relationship with the signing of two military defense cooperation agreements since 2019. The most recent one established a US presence in Alexandroupoli, very close to the Turkish border, I believe 11 kilometers from the Turkish border. And once Alexandroupoli is fully developed, including modern rail connections, it will be a very efficient means of the US transporting materials north to other NATO allies, Bulgaria and Romania, and will actually be able to do so more quickly than it can send things through the Bosporus currently. We've seen the US in recent years built up bases in Romania and Bulgaria, as well as elsewhere in the Middle East. I would call all of this bet hedging in case Turkey were to drift even further from the alliance or leave it altogether. Currently, people are watching the Turkish elections, the upcoming Turkish election campaign, very closely. Nobody will say it publicly, of course, but I think there is a feeling that if Mr. Erdogan remains in office, that Turkey will continue its policy at best of balance between the West and Russia, and at worst, maybe would drift even more closely to Russia, while there is a feeling that were the opposition to win, US-Turkish relations might be put on a more correct course. More to the point that Turkey might resume something closer to the pro-Western stance that it traditionally had. Will that happen? Time will tell. Of course, nobody in the US government would say they're rooting for Mr. Erdogan to lose. And I don't think anybody would bet with 100% certainty that even were the opposition to win, that Turkey's policy would change dramatically. Personally, I do think there would be a significant change. I don't think it would be 180 degrees. No Turkish government, for example, would apply sanctions on Russia. Turkey has always had the policy, the stated policy, that the only sanctions it applies are UN sanctions. It would continue to take advantage of commerce with Russia. I do think, however, that because the opposition is more secular, it would likely be closer to the West. It would see the West as a source of potential support. I think many in the West would want to help to bolster a new government in Turkey. Investment is more likely to come from the West, which is still overwhelmingly the source of most foreign direct investment in Turkey. Regarding Ukraine, although Turkey would not apply sanctions on Russia, I think it would be less likely to try to be a sanctions busting country. There is a gray area between doing normal commerce with Russia and going beyond. And I think in the US right now, there are a lot of concerns that Turkey is going beyond, and it's being watched very carefully. And the Turks are aware of this, and of course they have backed off applying the mere credit system in Turkey and have been responsive to US demands along those lines, but the suspicion remains. So I do think it would make a difference, and I think people are in Washington holding their breath, hoping for some kind of change in Turkish policy that probably could only come through a change of government. Right now, there are several major areas of contention between the US and Turkey, and each side has its complaints about the other. I mentioned on the US side concern about Turkish policy towards the war on Ukraine. Turkey has tried to balance, on the one hand, its relations between Russia and the West. On the other hand, it's also tried to balance its relations between Russia and Ukraine. Turkey has very important relations with Ukraine, particularly in the military-industrial realm. It foresees Ukraine co-producing engines for Turkish drones, and also in the long run, I believe, for quite possibly for other Turkish equipment as well. Ukraine holds for Turkey the advantage of having sophisticated military know-how, while at the same time would be unlikely to apply human rights criteria on any military cooperation with Turkey, unlike what Western states have done. So Turkey has tried to balance, it's a double balancing act. It's Russia and the West, and it's Russia and Ukraine. And Turkey has followed its traditional paradigm of taking a rhetorical stance with the West, but not applying sanctions on Russia. This was the approach it took in 2008 with the Russian invasion of Georgia, and same in 2014 in Ukraine. Ukraine is certainly one area where the US is continuing to watch Turkish policy very closely. Oh, I should add, I think the US has begrudgingly accepted the way Turkey is handling the Ukraine war, because Turkey has been able to make itself useful because of its fence-straddling position, in particular in negotiating the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And that is something the US wanted, and I think it's something that is very unlikely to have been brought about by any other state. So, of course, the UN had a role too, but I think Turkey did play a key role. And so there's been a certain begrudging acceptance of Turkey's fence sitting regarding the Ukraine war. There is also great concern about the prospect that Turkey will stage yet another land invasion in Syria. There is great concern about Turkey's ongoing refusal to ratify the NATO membership of Sweden and Finland. And of course, looming over all of it is the issue of the S-400s, which has now been with us for several years and has made it very difficult for the United States to sell major equipment to Turkey, and has been a major thorn in the side of bilateral relations. And in fact, there is US legislation which prevents Turkey from buying the F-35s until they divest themselves of the S-400s. regarding Syria, the US is very concerned about the prospect of another Turkish land invasion, which Erdogan has been threatening now for nearly a year. Just to refresh your audience's memory, the US is working with a militia in northeastern Syria, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is a multi-ethnic militia, but it is spearheaded primarily by a Kurdish group called the YPG. And that group was created, in fact, roughly 2 decades ago by the PKK, which both the US and Turkey consider a terrorist group. Turkey considers the YPG to be no different than the PKK. So it's a very difficult problem between the US and Turkey. Turkey threatens to invade. Turkey's made clear that they would like to push the Syrian Democratic Forces completely off the border. In fact, they're largely not on the border. Turkey really is uncomfortable with their presence in northeast Syria. And that is what their invasion is about. They are aiming to, in effect, obliterate a force that the United States sees as absolutely crucial to our campaign against the Islamic State. And just in case some people don't realize that the Islamic State remains a serious threat in Syria. It doesn't control broad swaths of territory like it used to, but it continues to stage actions, particularly in eastern and central Syria. That's one aspect of our problem with Turkey-Syria problem. A second is that Erdogan is now talking about meeting with Assad. There was recently a trilateral meeting between Russian, Syrian, and Turkish defense ministers. The Turkish foreign minister recently announced that there would be a trilateral foreign affairs ministers meeting as well towards the end of the month, towards the end of January. Trilateral against Syria, Turkey, and Russia. And Erdogan says it should lead to an overall leadership meeting. Now, this is an incredible flip-flop for Turkey because Turkey under Erdogan has been the primary sponsor of the Syrian opposition that has been fighting Assad since 2011. So it's a remarkable change in policy, induced probably by Erdogan's desire to partner with Assad against the Kurds, and also induced by Russian influence over Erdogan. The United States does not want to see any new legitimacy accorded to Assad. It has come out strongly against any kind of Turkish recognition or meetings with the Assad regime. But I would say overall, this is, with all our other issues with Turkey, just to recap, the closeness with Russia and Ukraine, Turkey's ongoing non-ratification of Swedish and Finnish membership in NATO, its possession of S-400s, and in particular, the threat to invade Syria, and of course, the ongoing building of tensions in the Aegean with Greece, with Cyprus, whether it's threatening to come suddenly one night onto the islands that Turkey says should be demilitarized, as Erdogan has repeatedly threatened over the past year, or whether it is the transgressing of Greek airspace. All of these are first-tier issues for the United States. I think the United States, however, unhappily, would not put Erdogan's meeting with Assad in the same category. After all, other US-friendly states, such as the UAE and Jordan, have increased their relations with Syria. However, if Turkey were to partner with Assad against the Kurdish-led militia that the US allies with against Islamic State, then I think that's a frontier issue. That is a first tier issue. The United States does not want to see any further assault by Turkey on the YPG. In October of 2019, Turkey did invade part of the area that had been under the US sphere of influence in northern Syria. And following that invasion, which prompted the US for a short time to put sanctions on Turkey, the sanctions were lifted after Turkey signed a ceasefire agreement, according to which the YPG actually pulled back from the border. And Turkey then signed its own separate agreement with Russia to police an area 10 kilometers deep across on the Syrian side of the Turkish-Syrian border in the northeast. Turkey really does not have a lot to complain about regarding attacks by the YPG on Turkish territory. To my knowledge, there has been no YPG or PKK-initiated cross-border attack from Syria. Now, there have been some rocket firings in retaliation for Turkish bombing of the area, or bombings of by Turkish allied Syrian opposition groups. But there's been no terrorist action staged. There was a major terrorist action on November 13th in Istanbul on one of its fabled streets, on Istiklal Street, which led to a number of, I believe, 8 deaths and a number of casualties. Turkey blamed that on an Arab woman who it said had been trained by the YPG in Syria, but it was not very convincing, and they haven't been able to bring forth convincing evidence. And Turkey itself said that the woman came from Afrin. Afrin is actually controlled by Turkey, not by the Kurdish group. So it seems pretty unlikely that this Arab woman coming from Turkish-controlled territory had been trained by the YPG. That is the excuse Turkey has used for the most recent round of threats to invade northern Syria. Again, I think that's a very big issue. Were it to happen, I should say that although Turkey is prevented by formal sanctions from buying the F-35, the US administration has said that it would be willing to sell Turkey F-16 fighter jets, upgraded to Block 70, which is more sophisticated than the version of the F-16 that Turkey currently has. Were Turkey to invade Syria, I think there's no way they could get the F-16s. And Congress would absolutely put its foot down. And I don't think the administration would even bring the sale of F-16s to Congress if Turkey invaded Syria. So I think that would be the end. Let me just say from the Turkish point of view that their biggest problem with the United States is the fact that we work with the YPG, which Turkey considers to be part and parcel of the PKK. It's a close call, just what the relationship is between YPG and PKK. It is clear that the YPG shares the ideology of the PKK, a Marxist-Leninist ideology. They venerate the same leader, Abdullah Öcalan. It is the feeling of the United States, including people who have been in the field and worked with the YPG, that they are not part of any kind of command and control mechanism with the PKK. Nevertheless, Turkey does not welcome the fact that the US supplies arms to this group, and it fears that its cooperation with the United States will help it to solidify some kind of autonomous entity on its border. I think one has to say those are not irrational fears on Turkey's part. Those are legitimate concerns. And I think this problem is going to continue for a while because I think the United States is going to have to continue to work with the YPG against ISIS. The YPG, as the main force of the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, which also includes many Arabs and Assyrians, Surianis, they'll continue to be the main ground force for the United States in the region for the foreseeable future until ISIS is thoroughly defeated. By the way, how did it happen that the United States ended up partnering with this group whose origins is in another group that the US considers terrorist? When ISIS was sweeping across northern Syria, the United States actually asked Turkey to go in and save the Kurdish town of Kobani from ISIS. Turkey refused. I think it's pretty clear at that point, Erdogan preferred to have ISIS conquer northern Syria than to have the YPG there. Initially, the United States said it had no interest or intention of going into Kobani and saving the town. But when the Turks refused, the UN, and particularly as the scenes from Kobani were playing out on the nightly news in the United States, very gruesome scenes of death and destruction, public pressure grew on the United States to do something. The US did send its troops in, it sent its Air Force in, and it did partner with, for the first time, with the YPG. And you could say, in a sense, it was a first date. And it worked. They drove ISIS out of Kobani. And it was after that that the US discovered that the YPG could be an effective partner against ISIS. So in some way, had the Turks responded to the US request to go into Kobani, and had the Turks been willing to be the main force against ISIS in Syria, I think you might not have had the US ever partnering with the YPG. So I think if Turkish diplomats could, if Turkish decision makers could roll back the clock, I think if they're honest with themselves, they realize that they would have been far better off being responsive to the US request to go into Kobani, and we probably would not have had this US YPG partnership. There are many more things you could say, particularly about Syria and about Turkish-US relations overall. I think some things that Turkey has done over the past year have been viewed positively. Turkey had very problematic relations with several US friends in the region, including the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Israel. It's made major efforts and improved its relations considerably with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, and has actually, particularly with the UAE, now built up quite a relationship. The UAE has said it's going to invest $10 billion in Turkey. Turkey has normalized relations with Israel. You know, that is viewed positively. By the way, with Egypt, it's more difficult to patch that one. Sisi and Erdogan did have a handshake at the World Cup, but there is quite a bit of resentment on both sides. Sisi sees Erdogan as a strong supporter of the Muslim Brotherhood government that Sisi himself overthrew. And of course, there's also a rivalry in Libya, as well as some disagreements regarding boundaries in the Mediterranean. So this is a more difficult one for them to patch up. But I think the US is happy that Turkey has smoother relations in general in the region, particularly with Israel. However, I would say people are really not buying it yet, because there is a sense that Erdogan is doing this for election-related reasons. The Turkish economy was in a swoon. Erdogan's poll numbers were likewise in a swoon. The feeling was that he wanted to rebuild ties to these regional countries, not only for the sake of regional stability and security, but primarily for the sake of building economic ties and for making Turkey appear to be a more stable country that others could invest in. The suspicion is that, particularly regarding Israel, this normalization may not outlive the Turkish elections, particularly if Erdogan is reelected. While pleased with the normalization, we're withholding judgment for now. In any case, there is overall a vast array of problematic issues between the US and Turkey. Some of these issues will continue even if Erdogan loses his election, but the widespread expectation is that if Erdogan does remain in power, the problems between the United States and Turkey are likely only to deepen.